So the purpose of this activity is to help be a bridge between students learning about patterns and pattern rules and learning about linear relations and functions, starting with linear relations. And so the idea here is that we've got 20 different pattern rules that are being used inside of a function machine. And so if we look at the individual activity, and we look at the screens, you'll see that each function machine is set up in the same way. And the idea is, what's the rule? And we ask students to figure out the rule. And the way that they figure out the rule is by substituting numbers into the function machine and seeing what happens. So the way it works is, and you might need to do a little training with students, is you use the equation function. And you click on that and just click anywhere in there to type a number. And they choose whatever number they want to put into the function machine. So I'm going to choose 4. And then you have to click and drag it into the function machine. And you can tell when you can do that because you get the dotted box around there. And once it goes in, so the 4 goes in, and it spits out a 7. And so the rule is something that turns a 4 into a 7. And so students can try to guess at that point, or they can choose to put a new number in. So I'm going to put the number 2 in. And when I drag 2, a 2 goes in there and a 5 comes out. So when I put the 4 in, it turned into a 7. When I put the 2 in, it turned into a 5. What could that rule be? And so students are encouraged to put as many numbers in as they want, to drag in and see what they think the rule is in this particular case. And we want students to, tell us what they think the rule is and how they figured that out in the box there. And as you can see, there are over 20 different function machines with different linear functions in them. Now, if you take a look at the description, you can see that there is a Google Doc that shows what all the different functions are. So this is the actual progression of functions as you go from the first slide to the 20th slide. And you can see there's actually a Polypad version for each one of those. So if you wanted instead not to use Desmos and not to get that student feedback from each one, you could do that directly by giving students the Polypad. And you get the exact same function machine, and it works in exactly the same way. One difference is, in the full Polypad, you can actually just drag number tiles in there instead of using the equation mode. Now, of course, the advantage to using Desmos is that you will get student feedback about each particular function machine. And when you're doing this, I do suggest that once you have students in, you turn anonymize on so that students don't know who they are, and that you paste this. So my idea with this is that this is actually used in the unit before you actually start doing linear relations, and that you would do maybe 1 or 2 of these a day as a starter for the lesson, certainly unrelated to the unit that you might actually be in, but just as a warm-up for the following unit so that kids are primed when you actually start in linear relations. And so that being said, I would definitely use the pacing feature and only allow students to be in the slide that you want. So you can do that by restricting them to the screen. And so any particular student, they can't move on to any screen that you don't want them to be on. And then as you progress through the different screens, you can either add a screen. So once they've done slide 1, you can add slide 2, or you could instead just click on the individual screen that you want them to be on for that particular day, or series of screens for that particular day. And so, as I said, what I would be doing is I would be doing 1 or 2 of these a day. And you can see the progression here. We start with simple one-step equations. First in adding with whole numbers and decimals and fractions, and then with subtraction with whole numbers and decimals and fractions, and then we look at multiplying or multiplying by a fraction, and then multiplying by a negative number, and then we move into 2-step equations. This way especially when you have a wide range of abilities in your class, you can talk about these function rules in a very informal way, using that friendly function machine where it's more like a puzzle. And you can start using this notation of x plus 3 or n plus 3 or whatever you want to do, but keep the language informal for students. And like I said, you can choose if you want to use the Desmos version and that way collect all their information, or if you want, just give them each an individual Polypad version. Now, one thing I do suggest is once you start to get into the more complex ones here, after a few days of doing these, so some of the two-step ones, you start to talk to students about choosing numbers strategically to try to pick and find the pattern rule. So instead of choosing numbers randomly, start to think about what are some strategies for picking a number strategically. Now, one thing I have done and that you might want to do is to help them with that organization. And you can't really do this in the Desmos version because there's not a lot of real estate here with the function machine. But if you use the Polypad version, let's say of starting with slide 14, what you can do is as you put the numbers in, so I'm going to use the tiles here just because that's a little bit simpler. And so I'm going to put values in. And as I put those in, they become their individual values. But what I can do at that point is I can choose to tabulate. And what that will do is it will now organize those into a table. Now, it will only organize those into a table in the order that you put the numbers in. So if you don't put them in numerically, they're going to be mixed up. But you can help to start getting that idea of what might be a systematic way to choose numbers by doing this, and then take that a step further by choosing the algebra tab and adding a graph. And if you take that little arrow and connect to the graph, then you can actually plot those points. And I'm going to actually change the axis so that more points are visible. And you can start to see that there is some sort of relationship between those points. And so once you get to the latter slides, you can start to connect to things like a line and things like that, even when you're not even talking in that nature, again, because you're doing this in the previous unit. And just so that you know, if you click on any one of the slides here under the teacher moves, there's also the link to the Polypad version and suggestions as to what you might want to ask students. And as well, in the sample response section, it will always say what the rule is for that particular function machine. So hopefully you find this useful in a way that helps bridge between just finding patterns and using them with linear relations, especially when you've got kids of a wide range of abilities in your class.